Okay, one final thing I'm doing here for this unit is I want to do a very, very quick, like 10-15 minute recap of the entire unit. So the unit began with nationalism, and the thing you want to go back and review for that are all of the nationalist theorists. Use the chart as a format to do that. It'll be a quick, easy way to check what you're remembering and what you're not remembering. Okay, then we focused on Braiuli's ideas of the three ways that nations are forming, particularly in Europe. So, reform, our case study is France from previous units, chapter 16 in particular. Unification, a quick way to kind of review the Italy and Germany stuff is to create a Venn diagram. And then the other two case studies, American Zionism, what they have in common is their uniqueness. So, what makes them unique and yet still makes them a nation? Then the final way of forming a nation is through separation. And our case study, of course, was the Ottoman Empire. A lot of Southern European nations are going to become just that, nations, because of the separation of the Ottoman Empire into smaller states. A good way to review the Ottoman Empire is to create that mental map or recreate it, where you have the Ottoman weakness in the center and then 5 key things that are leading to the weakness, and try to remember some of the details for that as well. One of those 5 things is going to be the Crimean War. For the Crimean War, you want to know what causes the Crimean War, what are things like before the war, what actually happens during the war, and then what's the impact of the war. This comes from the timeline that we had done in class the one day. There are 4 impacts. The events, you want to know who was fighting who, you want to know why, but you also want to know some examples of how British nationalism is developing. And then you want to know for the causes, the reasons why Russia is going to target the Ottoman Empire, as well as the reasons why the Ottoman Empire is going to be supported by European nations like Britain and like France. So that's how you want to study for the nationalism part of this unit. The next part of this unit, we moved on to the imperialism section. So you'll notice down at the southern tip of Africa, some information is starting to show up there. You have first the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, and then finally the British coming in. You want to go back and review the reasons for that. Then you also have Mfcane, which is this displacement of people, multiple groups of people. And then the other important thing to remember about South Africa is the employment of the manipulation of taxes being paid in cash to force people into the gold and the diamond mines, and that this is a way to manipulate the economy. Another case study we looked at that's significant in addition to South Africa is Egypt. Your person to remember for Egypt is Muhammad Ali, and the fact that he is going to westernize. He copies multiple things from the West, but his downfall, the thing he does incorrectly, is he focuses on monoculture, allows Europeans to give him loans, and that eventually gets Egypt into debt. So the main problem with Egypt, the main way the Europeans take control is through debt. Last thing you want to go back and review is the information about the Suez Canal and the impact that that's going to have on South Africa as well. So there's a connection there that you'll want to review. So taxes for South Africa, debt for Egypt. Let's look at another case. Another case in Africa is Algeria. And remember, in Algeria, it's the French. Egypt, it's the Brits. And in South Africa, you see the Portuguese, the Dutch, and then the British. So you do want to keep in mind who is colonizing in what location. Algeria, remember, they're going to use that strategy of taking land ownership away, which means they will take away the right of voting. Originally, they go into Algeria on the claim of pirates, being involved in disrupting trade. And once again, Algeria and South Africa, very, very good examples of settler colonies. They also hold in common that both did the whole no land equals no vote thing. So South Africa, Algeria have some similarities there. Over here, you're seeing me mark off then Liberia and Sierra Leone, your free slave states. Over here, you're seeing Congo and Igbo region. So this is King Leopold and things fall apart. The things that you want to remember for the central part of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, are the examples of social Darwinism from those readings, as well as the examples of mechanisms of control. Okay, those are the 2 things that you want to go back, look at your notes, pull out for those 2 readings. You want to know the use of the church, the use of education, you want to know the use of violence, the whole thing with King Leopold and the creation of this slave system in the central part of Africa and in the Belgian Congo, right? In conjunction with that, coming more from Spodek, you want to go back and review the distinction between Livingstone and Stanley, two different types of explorers and colonizers. I just want to pause that for a moment here. Livingstone focused much more on this ideal of the mission to civilize. Livingstone is still going to think that Europeans are superior, but he's going to respect in many cases the African people. He endeavors to learn their native languages, but he is on a mission to civilize. So there is an element of social Darwinism there. Stanley also believes in social Darwinism, but it's more of the Spencer type of social Darwinism, where the mission is only to exploit, because they don't view Africans as being really truly equal human beings. So two different sides of this phenomenon that we call colonialism. And then also for sub-Saharan Africa, and actually the entirety of Africa, the last important concept you need to remember is the scramble for Africa. Go back and look at that Nearpod. Make sure that you understand what Otto von Bismarck and the rest of Europe was doing and how the scramble for Africa actually worked and the repercussions of it. And, of course, why it is able to happen in this phase once we have the Industrial Revolution. So you want to go back and look at those aspects of the importance of medicines like quinine, as well as the machine gun and steamboats. So go back and look at that connection. All right, on to Asia. New color here. So separating out these three. China, you have to remember it's beginning with the Opium Wars. And the Opium Wars really coming down to the fact that Europe industrialized and has these weapons. There are also a series of rebellions. So you want to remember and refresh your memory about the Taiping Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, some of the earlier peripheral rebellions. And then, of course, the 1911 revolution, which is what ends the dynastic system. Then also an important thing to remember about China are the spheres of influence that are created, particularly this power of extraterritoriality, or that ability to follow your own rules even when you're living in somebody else's country. This is an example of indirect rule. So it'd be very different from what we saw in South Africa and Algeria, where there's direct rule with a settler colony. Moving over to India. How do they gain access to India? This time it's not through war and drugs, but instead it's through exploiting pre-existing social divisions, in this case with the regional princes. Remember, it's very similar to the Aztec situation. Once they start to gain some power, then they begin to manipulate the taxes, the tariffs, the economy in general, deciding what crops are being grown and things like that. It's still not direct rule. It's still not everybody there a settler colony yet. That doesn't happen until after the Sepoy Rebellion or the Sepoy Mutiny. Remember the elements of social Darwinism there, the disregard for the traditional beliefs. And it's the Sepoy Rebellion that makes Britain realize that they need to directly control India because people are fighting back too much. And this is when the military comes in and India becomes a settler colony. Also remember about India, the use of the railroad, that they're building all this infrastructure, but they're using it with Indian tax money, and the Indians are receiving very little of the benefit. The railroads that are constructed in India are basically for the benefit of the British. In Southeast Asia, you want to remember that the French control Indochina. They take it over after the Chinese lose it, so the French take over Indochina. The French are also involved in India, remember, and it's because of the 7 Years' War that they're pushed out of there. And then finally, let's take a look at the Dutch. The Dutch are down in Indonesia, particularly Java. The Java War is going to take place. Remember, the Java War takes place for very similar reasons to the Sepoy Rebellion, social Darwinism, when they try to build the road through the shrine. After the war, it leads to direct military control over Java and Indonesia. You see the tax system, a labor-based tax system, Kürzel coming in and being used as well. So it's it's a tax system based on labor. And then you also see the reversal of that later on. And the Dutch are the first that are going to kind of reverse this era of colonialism. And then lastly, Japan, which is somewhat different. It's a case study where they're actually successful, right, in rebelling against and kind of separating the colonial powers. They also have spheres of influence initially, but how do they break these bonds? They copy the West. When they copy all of the rules and regulations that the West has, there is no more reason now, no more justification for extraterritoriality. And this is really the key to the Japanese breaking away. Once you actually have laws in your country that are identical to the laws in England or in America, there's no longer a justification for having extraterritoriality or any of those special rules. So Japan is really like the exception to the rule here. Now let's put it all together. Nationalism is going to lead to two things that impact colonialism, right? So nationalism leads to competition, increased competition between these national states in Europe, and it also leads to this idea of the other. And competition and the other are going to be played out in the rest of the world, right? So the colonization that takes place in the rest of the world, it's happening and it's intensifying because of competition, the idea of the other, which comes from nationalism. So the three of those are intimately linked. And of course, you'll use that when writing your essay as well. Okay, hope this helped. Very brief kind of rundown of everything that we studied in this unit.